The sun was shining brightly over London, and the crowd outside Buckingham Palace was growing larger by the minute. People from all over the world stood behind the black iron gates, pointing cameras toward the famous royal guards. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, tourists took endless pictures, and everyone whispered with excitement when the guards marched past in perfect rhythm. Their red uniforms looked spotless, their tall black hats made them seem even taller, and their stillness impressed everyone who watched. Among the crowd was a man named Ethan. He wasn't there to admire the history or take pictures like everyone else. He had come with a few friends after spending the morning at a nearby cafe, laughing too loudly and trying to show off. Ethan liked attention. He often said he was stronger than most men, and he liked proving it, especially when people were watching. His friends often encouraged his little stunts because they found them funny. But this time, things would not go the way he expected. "Come on, Ethan," one of his friends said, nudging him with a grin. "You always say you're the toughest guy in London. Those guards can't even move. Go test your strength." Ethan smirked. "You mean those statue-looking guys? They're not allowed to move a muscle. I'll just walk up and see if they even notice." The others laughed, cheering him on like it was a joke. They didn't mean any harm, but they also didn't understand the respect those guards commanded. Ethan didn't either. Not yet. Across the courtyard, Corporal James Avery stood in his usual post near the palace gate. He had been part of the Queen's Guard for 5 years. His job was simple but sacred. Stand guard, remain composed, and protect the palace at all costs. Rain or shine, noise or silence, his focus never wavered. Every tourist, every camera flash, every mocking comment, he had seen it all. But he never responded. His duty was to remain a symbol of discipline and respect. As Ethan approached, people began to notice. A few tourists whispered and pointed. Some even started recording with their phones. Everyone knew that touching or mocking a royal guard was something you just didn't do. But Ethan didn't care. He walked with confidence, his sunglasses on, his grin wide. He stopped right in front of Corporal Avery and tilted his head. "You're really not going to move, huh?" he said, trying to provoke a reaction. The guard remained perfectly still, his rifle resting by his side, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Ethan waved a hand in front of the guard's face. Nothing. The crowd began to murmur. A little boy tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, is that man allowed to do that?" The mother frowned. "No, sweetheart. He shouldn't." Ethan smirked again. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Just a man in uniform pretending to be a robot." He turned to his friends, who were laughing quietly. "Watch this," he said, and then before anyone could stop him, he reached out and grabbed the guard's arm. For a moment, the crowd gasped. The sound of laughter stopped completely. All that could be heard was the steady click of camera shutters. Ethan's hand was firm on the guard's forearm as he tried to pull it slightly forward, expecting the guard to stumble or react. But nothing happened. Corporal Avery's arm didn't move. It was like trying to pull a wall made of iron. His posture didn't change, his boots stayed planted on the ground, and his expression remained unreadable. Inside, Avery's training took over. His muscles tightened, but he didn't overreact. His eyes, hidden behind the shadow of his tall hat, stayed locked forward. Ethan frowned. He hadn't expected that kind of strength. He tried again, gripping harder, but the guard didn't move an inch. The tension in the air grew heavier. Even the birds in the nearby trees seemed to go silent. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh no, he's in trouble." Another person said softly, "You can't touch them. That's serious." After a few long seconds, Avery finally moved, but not the way Ethan hoped. His voice, calm and firm, echoed across the courtyard. "Step away from the Queen's Guard." It wasn't a shout, but it carried authority, so powerful and clear that it made Ethan freeze. It was the voice of a man who was trained to protect, not entertain. His tone wasn't angry, but it carried centuries of military discipline in every syllable. Ethan's hand dropped immediately. He took a step back, his grin fading fast. The guard had moved only slightly, but that single action was enough to make the point clear. The moment felt endless as everyone watched in silence. The police officers near the gate began to move closer, watching the situation carefully. Ethan quickly raised his hands and stepped backward. "Easy there, I didn't mean anything," he said, his voice suddenly nervous. Corporal Avery said nothing more. He didn't need to. He returned to his position, rifle steady, eyes fixed ahead once again. Within seconds, it was as though nothing had happened. That calm return to stillness was the most powerful thing of all. Ethan's friends looked at each other, unsure of what to say. The joke that had seemed so funny a minute ago now felt childish and embarrassing. The tourists were still watching, whispering and shaking their heads. Some were recording, others taking photos. Ethan could already imagine the video spreading online with titles like "Man Touches Royal Guard, Instantly Regrets It." Feeling the heat of humiliation, Ethan turned away quickly. His friends followed, whispering awkwardly as they left the crowd behind. For the rest of the walk, nobody laughed. Ethan's pride had taken a silent blow, and deep down he knew he deserved it. A few minutes later, back near the street, Ethan leaned against a railing, rubbing his arm as though the moment had left a mark. His friend tried to lighten the mood. "Well, mate, you sure proved something." Ethan looked up, his expression serious now. "Yeah," he said softly. "I proved I was the fool." He looked back toward the palace one last time. From where he stood, the guard was just a small figure in the distance, still as a statue, loyal as ever. Ethan realized that real strength didn't need loud words or showing off. It came from discipline, respect, and calm power. As the day went on, tourists kept gathering, laughing, taking pictures, and enjoying their trip. But one man walked away a little wiser. Ethan didn't just see a soldier standing still anymore. He saw a symbol of what it meant to stay calm in the face of mockery, to protect without losing composure, and to earn respect not by shouting but by standing tall in silence. That single encounter lasted only a few moments, but it stayed in Ethan's mind for years. He had set out to prove he was stronger. Instead, he met a man who showed him that true strength never needs to prove itself. The air outside Buckingham Palace was still tense after the short but powerful exchange. Tourists who had witnessed the scene couldn't stop talking about it. Many had their phones out, showing others the clip they had just recorded. Some were whispering in surprise, others smiling with admiration for the guard's calm strength. The crowd slowly began to settle again, but the story of the man who dared to grab the royal guard's arm was already spreading like wildfire through the visitors. Ethan, however, stood a short distance away from the palace, still feeling the weight of what he had done. His heart was beating fast. He looked back at the spot where the guard still stood motionless once more, as if the entire event had never happened. His friends gathered around him, trying to laugh it off. "Come on, mate," one said. "You just gave people a show. It's no big deal." But Ethan didn't reply. His throat felt dry, and the more he thought about it, the less funny it seemed. From where he stood, he could still see Corporal James Avery, tall and steady, standing as though carved from stone. The sun gleamed off the metal of his rifle. Children were pointing at him again, asking questions, and parents were explaining how special the royal guards were. Ethan listened without meaning to. One woman told her son, "These soldiers protect the palace. They train for years. They are brave, disciplined men who don't move no matter what happens." The boy looked at her with wide eyes and whispered, "So they're like heroes?" She smiled. "Yes, they are." Those simple words hit Ethan harder than he expected. Heroes. He had mocked one just moments ago. The pride that had filled his chest earlier now turned into a quiet shame. His friends were still talking behind him, trying to make jokes about how strong the guard's arm must be, but Ethan couldn't laugh anymore. Meanwhile, inside the palace gates, 2 other guards noticed what had happened and reported it through their communication line. The incident was small, but it was still a matter of discipline and respect. The royal guards were trained never to overreact, but also never to ignore disrespect. The supervisor, an older sergeant named Henderson, watched through the cameras inside and nodded with approval. Corporal Avery had handled it perfectly. No anger, no unnecessary reaction, just control. That was exactly what their uniform stood for. A few police officers stationed nearby had also noticed the disturbance. One of them, Officer Claire Matthews, calmly walked over to the area where Ethan had been standing earlier. She spoke politely to a few witnesses, taking notes just in case a formal warning needed to be issued. Most people said the same thing. The guard had stayed calm, and the man had looked embarrassed. Nothing more had happened. It was enough to leave a strong impression on everyone who saw it. As Officer Matthews turned to leave, she caught sight of Ethan standing by the railing, staring at the palace gates. She walked up to him and said in a friendly but firm tone, "I saw what happened earlier. You were lucky he didn't take it further. Do you understand how serious that could have been?" Ethan nodded, his voice low. "Yeah, I didn't think. I was just trying to be funny." The officer studied him for a moment, then softened her tone. "Most people don't realize it, but those guards are real soldiers. They train hard and serve with honor. It's not just about standing still, they protect this place and everyone in it. Next time, show them the respect they deserve." Ethan lowered his head slightly. "I will. I'm sorry." Satisfied, Officer Matthews gave a small nod and walked back to her post. Ethan's friends had already grown quiet, realizing the situation wasn't something to joke about anymore. One of them sighed. "Guess we messed up, huh?" Ethan looked at the palace again. "No," he said softly. "I messed up." A light breeze blew through the courtyard, carrying the faint sound of marching boots from inside the palace. The changing of the guard was about to begin again. Crowds started gathering with excitement, their earlier tension replaced by admiration. As the new group of guards approached in perfect synchronization, their boots hit the ground in flawless rhythm. Every movement was sharp, every turn exact. The scene was mesmerizing. Ethan stood watching, feeling something shift inside him. For the first time, he noticed the quiet power in their stillness. There was no boasting, no need to prove anything. They simply performed their duty with pride and discipline. That was real strength, he realized. Not the kind you show off for applause, but the kind you hold within yourself, steady and calm. A small girl standing nearby clapped her hands and said to her father, "They look so brave." Her father smiled and replied, "They are. That's why people come from all over the world to see them." Those words echoed in Ethan's mind. Brave, strong, respectful. He remembered how his hand had failed to move the guard's arm even slightly, how that one firm command had made him freeze. It wasn't fear that had stopped him. It was respect. The kind that comes naturally when you recognize someone who truly understands duty. As the ceremony ended and the guards switched positions, Corporal Avery took his slow, measured steps back toward the barracks. His posture never changed, but his focus softened slightly as the crowd applauded. He didn't look for praise. He only felt grateful that he had upheld the dignity of his role. For him, moments like these were reminders that patience and discipline could silence even the loudest disrespect. Ethan stayed until the crowd began to thin. His friends eventually grew bored and left, saying they'd meet him later at the cafe. But Ethan didn't move right away. He leaned against the railing, watching the palace gate shimmer under the afternoon sun. He thought about how quickly pride could turn into embarrassment, and how the smallest mistake could teach the biggest lesson. That night, as he walked home through the quiet streets of London, Ethan couldn't stop replaying the scene in his head, the unshakable guard, the calm voice, the power hidden in stillness. He realized he had been wrong about what strength meant. It wasn't about proving anything to others. It was about self-control, respect, and quiet confidence. When he reached his flat, he opened his phone and saw the videos already circulating online. The clip had been shared hundreds of times with captions like, "Royal Guard handles disrespect like a true professional." In every comment section, people praised the guard's calmness and composure. No one was cheering for Ethan. Instead, they were writing things like, "That's what real strength looks like." Ethan turned off the phone and sat in silence. He had never felt so small, yet somehow he also felt lighter. The experience had humbled him. He made a quiet promise to himself never to mock someone in uniform again. From that day on, whenever he passed Buckingham Palace, he stopped for a moment. Not to take a picture, not to show off, but simply to watch in quiet respect. He would stand behind the crowd, hands folded, and look at the guards the way everyone else did, with admiration. He didn't know Corporal Avery's name, and the guard would never know his. But between them, in that brief and silent moment, long ago a powerful lesson had been exchanged, one that didn't need words. Ethan had come that morning to show how strong he was, but the man in red, standing tall and calm, had shown him what true strength really meant. Ethan stood there in the middle of the crowd, his heart still thumping, feeling a mix of embarrassment and confusion. A few moments ago, he had been full of pride, laughing with his friends, ready to show off in front of everyone. But now everything felt different. The laughter around him had died out and people were staring, not at the royal guard anymore, but at him. Some had their phones up, whispering to one another. Others just shook their heads, quietly judging. He turned his head and saw a few tourists looking at him with disbelief. A middle-aged man wearing a camera around his neck muttered, "Why would anyone touch a royal guard? That's just wrong." A woman beside him agreed, saying, "He's lucky he didn't get arrested." Ethan heard every word, and each one felt heavier than the last. He swallowed hard, feeling his confidence slowly fade. His friends, who had been cheering a few minutes earlier, now looked uneasy. One of them tried to break the silence. "It's okay, mate," he said awkwardly. "You didn't mean any harm." But even he didn't sound sure of his own words. Ethan just nodded and looked at the guard again. Corporal James Avery stood exactly where he had been before, straight, silent, and unmoving. His expression hadn't changed. It was like the incident had never happened. That stillness made Ethan feel even smaller. There was something about the guard's calm that spoke louder than any words could. He wasn't angry. He didn't glare or scold. He simply returned to his duty as if to say, "I don't need to prove anything." The people around began to drift back to their sightseeing, but the energy had shifted. Many were talking softly about the incident, sharing admiration for the guard's discipline. A little boy sitting on his father's shoulders asked, "Dad, why didn't the soldier hit him back?" His father replied gently, "Because real soldiers know how to control their strength. That's what makes them brave." Those words stayed in Ethan's mind like an echo. Real soldiers know how to control their strength. He glanced again at the man in red, realizing that behind that quiet, still face was a kind of power he couldn't understand. Not the kind that comes from muscles, but the kind that comes from character. A few police officers who had been watching from a distance approached the area. But since Ethan had already stepped back and the guard had handled it calmly, there was nothing more to do. One officer briefly spoke to Ethan, explaining that touching a royal guard could have serious consequences. Ethan nodded quietly, apologizing again. The officer simply told him to respect the guards and walked away. The crowd slowly returned to normal. Tourists began laughing again. Children waved small flags, and the rhythm of London's afternoon life resumed. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling in his chest. Something had changed inside him, something that wouldn't let him return to joking and showing off like before. He leaned against the railing, still facing the palace. His friends were growing impatient. "Come on, Ethan," one said. "Let's grab a drink somewhere." "Forget it." Ethan didn't move. His eyes stayed on the guard. "You guys go," he said softly. "I'll catch up later." His friends looked at him, confused, but shrugged and walked away. He stood there for several minutes, just watching. The tourists were snapping photos again, admiring the guard's discipline and perfect stillness. Ethan began to notice details he had missed earlier. The way the guard's uniform was spotless, the way his boots were polished until they shined, the precision of every step when they switched positions. It wasn't just standing still. It was a form of silent respect, a symbol of dedication. And in that silence, Ethan finally started to understand what true strength looked like. It wasn't about showing off or trying to look powerful. It was about self-control, patience, and pride in what you stand for. A few minutes later, a new group of tourists walked up, and one of them, perhaps unaware of what had just happened, tried to get close to the guard for a selfie. Ethan, without even thinking, stepped forward slightly and said, "Hey, don't touch him. You're not supposed to." The tourist looked surprised but nodded, stepping back. Ethan realized what he had just done and felt a strange warmth in his chest. He had gone from mocking the guard to protecting his space. A few moments later, the sound of drums echoed across the courtyard. The changing of the guard ceremony was about to begin. The crowd cheered as a new formation of soldiers marched in perfect rhythm. The sight was mesmerizing. The synchronized steps, the gleam of metal, the precision in every motion. It was more than just ceremony. It was discipline turned into art. Ethan watched in silence, feeling respect swell inside him. He imagined how much training it must take to stand perfectly still under the blazing sun, to remain calm while people shouted or mocked, to maintain composure when tempted to react. It wasn't weakness, it was mastery. As the ceremony continued, a reporter standing nearby asked a bystander what had happened earlier. The woman said, "Some man tried to grab one of the guards, but the soldier stayed calm and handled it with such control. It was impressive." The reporter nodded, smiling. "That's what they're trained for," he said. Professional to the end. Ethan overheard it and his face turned slightly red. He felt grateful that no one mentioned his name. But he knew the video was already out there. Dozens of people had recorded it. He could almost imagine the titles. "Tourist touches Royal Guard, instantly learns a lesson." The thought made him cringe, but deep down he knew the title wouldn't be wrong. As the guards completed their routine and the ceremony ended, the crowd clapped. Ethan found himself joining in, clapping not just out of politeness but out of genuine respect. He didn't even notice when Corporal Avery turned slightly and began marching away toward the inner courtyard. For a moment their eyes met, or at least Ethan thought they did. The guard's expression didn't change, but something in that calm, steady gaze made Ethan nod quietly, almost as if to say thank you. He left the palace soon after, walking slowly down the wide stone path that led toward the main road, the noise of traffic mixed with the sound of tourists laughing behind him. London was alive as always, but Ethan felt oddly quiet inside. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. Later that evening, he met his friends at the cafe they always went to. They were still joking, laughing about how the video was probably already viral. "You're famous now, mate," one of them said. That guard didn't even blink. Ethan smiled faintly but didn't laugh. He sipped his drink and looked out the window. "Yeah," he said softly. He didn't need to. That's what makes him stronger. His friends looked at him strangely, unsure what to say, but Ethan didn't explain further. Some lessons don't need words. That night, when he finally got home, curiosity got the better of him. He opened his phone and checked social media. The video was there just as he expected. Thousands of views already. The comments were full of praise for the guard's composure. Some called him a real professional. Others wrote, "That man in red showed what true discipline looks like." Ethan scrolled for a long time. Not one comment defended him, and for the first time he didn't mind. He actually agreed with them. Before going to bed, he looked at a photo he had taken months ago of Buckingham Palace, back when he had visited as a tourist for the first time. It had always been just a tourist attraction to him before. Beautiful, grand, but distant. Now it meant something else. It represented honor, respect, and quiet strength. He turned off his phone, leaned back and whispered to himself, "That guard taught me something I'll never forget." The next morning, when he passed through the same area on his way to work, he slowed down near the palace gates. The crowd was already gathering again. The guard stood tall, just as before. Ethan smiled faintly and nodded to himself. He didn't need to get close this time. He understood now. It was amazing how a single moment, a firm voice, a calm look, a man who didn't need to move to show his strength, could change someone's entire perspective. Ethan had gone there trying to prove his power, but he left with something far greater: respect. He had learned that real strength doesn't shout, doesn't push, and doesn't need to win attention. Real strength stands quietly, firm in duty, calm in challenge, and unshaken by pride. And that was something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The next morning, London woke to another busy day, but for Ethan it didn't feel the same. The sunlight pouring through his apartment window reminded him of the day before, that moment outside Buckingham Palace when he had tried to prove his strength and ended up looking like a fool. He couldn't stop thinking about it. He sat at the edge of his bed scrolling through his phone, hoping somehow the video hadn't spread far. But it had. The clip was everywhere. Short, clear, and titled exactly as he feared. Tourist grabs Royal Guard's arm and instantly regrets it. Thousands of people had watched it. Some left laughing emojis, others comments like he learned his lesson and respect the uniform. There were even news pages reposting it with headlines about the discipline of the Queen's guards. Ethan sighed heavily and put his phone down. He didn't feel angry at anyone. He just felt ashamed. It was strange. He used to like attention even when it was negative, but this time it felt different. This wasn't the kind of fame he wanted. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel proud of standing out. He felt small. He got ready for work quietly that morning, moving slower than usual. On his way out, he looked at himself in the mirror near the door. He could still picture the guard's calm face, that still, unmoving expression that had made him realize something important. "You didn't even flinch," Ethan whispered to himself. "That's what strength looks like." When he stepped outside, London was alive as always. Buses rumbling, people hurrying with coffee cups, children laughing on their way to school. Normally, Ethan liked this energy. But today, every face he passed reminded him of the ones who had watched him yesterday. He couldn't help but wonder if someone would recognize him from the video. He imagined people whispering, "That's the guy who tried to touch the guard." It wasn't true, of course, and most people didn't even notice him. But the thought was enough to make him uneasy. At work, one of his co-workers called out, "Hey Ethan, you're famous, mate." "You're on the internet." He tried to smile, but his heart sank. "Yeah," he replied quietly. "I've seen it." His co-worker laughed. "Man, that guard didn't even blink." "You looked shocked." Ethan nodded slowly. "I was," he admitted. He didn't have to do much to show who's stronger. The co-worker laughed again, not realizing how serious Ethan was. But Ethan meant every word. For the rest of the day, he couldn't focus on his tasks. His mind kept returning to the same moment, his hand gripping the guard's arm, the firm, unshaken strength beneath the uniform, and that deep, calm voice that had stopped him cold. Step away from the Queen's Guard. That night, when Ethan got home, he sat down at his small desk and opened his laptop. For a long time, he just stared at the blank screen. Then, almost without thinking, he began to type. He started writing a letter. It wasn't for anyone in particular, but he wanted to put his thoughts into words. He wrote, "To the Royal Guard I disrespected yesterday. I don't know your name, but I want to say, I'm sorry. I didn't understand what your job really meant until I saw how you handled me. You didn't shout, you didn't act angry, and that made me realize how much discipline it takes to stay calm like that. You could have reacted, but you didn't. You stayed strong. I wish I had shown you the same respect you showed everyone else. Thank you for teaching me that real strength is quiet and calm, not loud or proud. I hope this message reaches you somehow." When he finished writing, he read it again. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. He printed it, folded it neatly, and placed it in an envelope. The next day, during his lunch break, he walked back toward Buckingham Palace. The palace looked just as beautiful as before. The golden gates, the shining black railings, the endless crowd of tourists. Ethan walked quietly among them, blending in this time. He didn't laugh, didn't speak, just watched. The same line of guards stood at attention, their uniforms spotless under the sun. He wasn't sure if Corporal Avery was among them, but it didn't matter. The letter wasn't for just one guard anymore. It was for all of them. Ethan approached a nearby security officer and explained softly, "I wanted to leave a thank you note for the Royal Guards. It's not about an incident, just appreciation." The officer looked at him curiously but nodded. "I can make sure it gets passed along." Ethan handed over the envelope and said quietly, "Thank you." Then he stepped back into the crowd, feeling lighter. He didn't wait for an answer. He knew the guard probably wouldn't read it personally, and that was fine. Writing it had already lifted something off his chest. Over the next few days, the video continued to circulate, but the sting of embarrassment began to fade. Instead of focusing on what people said, Ethan began to think more about what he had learned. He found himself watching documentaries about the Royal Guards, reading articles about their training. He learned how they practiced standing motionless for hours, how they trained to control their reactions even when people tried to distract or mock them. It amazed him how much discipline that took. One evening, as he watched a short interview with a retired guard, the man said something that stayed with him. "Our silence is not weakness. It's a choice, the strength to stay calm when others try to provoke you." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's it," he whispered. "That's exactly what I saw that day." From then on, every time he passed the palace on his way to work, he stopped for a few minutes to watch the guards. He didn't stand close or try to get their attention. He just watched quietly with respect. The tourists around him laughed and took pictures. But Ethan saw something deeper. The discipline, the pride, the sense of duty in every still figure standing tall beneath the London sky. Sometimes, He even noticed other visitors getting too close or trying to be funny, and he would gently say, "Hey, don't do that. They're doing their job." Most people listened. Some even thanked him. Months passed, and the memory of that day softened into a lesson, one that changed how Ethan treated others. He became calmer, more patient, and less eager to prove himself. His friends noticed. One day at the cafe, one of them said, "You've been different lately, quieter." Ethan smiled. "I guess I learned something about what real strength looks like." His friend raised an eyebrow. "From that guard?" "Yeah," Ethan said, "from that guard," and it was true. That single moment outside Buckingham Palace had reshaped how he saw the world, and himself. He had gone there thinking the guards were just silent statues, there for tourists to laugh at. But he left knowing they were symbols of dignity, honor, and discipline. He had gone there to show off but came away humbled. He had wanted to prove he was strong, but ended up learning that the strongest people are often the quietest ones, the ones who don't need to prove anything at all. Sometimes, life doesn't teach lessons through long speeches or dramatic moments. Sometimes it's just a short encounter, a calm voice, a steady look, and a moment of silence that makes you see everything differently. Ethan never saw Corporal Avery again, but he often wondered if the guard ever read his letter. Maybe he didn't. Maybe it was just placed among hundreds of others from tourists who wrote to thank the guards for their service. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that Ethan's respect for them, and for the value of self-control, had become part of him. Every time he saw a soldier, a police officer, or even a person quietly doing their duty with pride, he remembered that day. The sunlight over the palace, the crowd's gasp, and that calm, powerful voice. It reminded him that real power doesn't come from proving you're strong. It comes from knowing you don't have to. Weeks had passed since that day outside Buckingham Palace, but the memory of the royal guard still lived clearly in Ethan's mind. He couldn't forget the calm voice, the unshakable stillness, and the quiet power that had stopped him in his tracks. Every time he walked through central London, he found his eyes drawn to the palace gates. What once felt like a place for tourists now felt like something sacred, a symbol of honor, duty, and strength. One afternoon, while walking home from work, Ethan noticed a small group of schoolchildren standing near the palace. Their teacher was explaining the history of the royal guards, how they served the monarchy for centuries, standing watch through all weather and all seasons. The children listened with wide eyes, and when one boy asked if the guards ever got tired of standing so still, the teacher smiled. "Of course they get tired," she said, "but they stand anyway. That's what makes them strong. They serve something greater than themselves." Ethan stopped nearby, listening quietly. The teacher's words touched something deep inside him. They serve something greater than themselves. He thought back to his own life. He had spent years living only for attention, trying to impress people, make them laugh, or look tough. But that never brought him real satisfaction. Watching those guards had shown him something different, a kind of pride that didn't need applause. Later that evening, Ethan sat at a small cafe near the Thames River. The city lights shimmered on the water as he stirred his tea slowly, thinking about everything that had happened. He realized how much he had changed since that day. He didn't get into silly arguments anymore. He didn't show off or try to outdo his friends. Instead, he had started helping people more, speaking calmly and thinking before acting. Even his co-workers had noticed the difference. A few days later, something surprising happened. Ethan received a short letter in the mail from the Royal Household Correspondence Office. At first, he thought it was a mistake, but when he opened it, he found a neatly printed note inside. It said, "Dear Mr. Carter, we received your kind letter addressed to the Royal Guard stationed at Buckingham Palace. While we cannot guarantee personal correspondence, please know that your message was passed along through the appropriate channels. The guards appreciate the public's respect and understanding of their duties. Your words are a thoughtful reminder that respect is earned through composure and discipline. With thanks, the Royal Household Communications Office." Ethan sat in silence after reading it. It wasn't a long message, but it meant the world to him. They had read his letter. Maybe not Corporal Avery himself, but someone had, and they had taken the time to reply. It felt like a small piece of redemption, a sign that his apology hadn't gone unnoticed. That evening, Ethan walked to Buckingham Palace once more. The golden glow of the setting sun made the palace look even more majestic. Tourists were everywhere again, families taking pictures, couples holding hands, and street performers entertaining the crowd. But among all the noise, the guards stood tall, silent and still, their uniforms catching the soft light of the evening. Ethan stood quietly near the railing, his hands resting on the cold metal bars. He didn't try to get closer this time. He didn't take pictures. He just watched. The rhythm of the soldiers' slow, deliberate movements seemed almost peaceful now. The sound of boots on stone echoed like a heartbeat of discipline. He wondered if Corporal Avery was among them. Maybe he was. Maybe not. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the lesson that moment had taught him, a lesson that would never fade. A tourist couple standing nearby spoke softly in admiration. "It's amazing how they stay so calm even when people try to make them laugh," the woman said. Her husband nodded. "Takes real strength to stay still like that." Ethan smiled faintly. He whispered to himself, "Yes, it does." A few months later, Ethan's life looked very different. He had taken up a new job at a local community center, helping young people learn about discipline, respect, and responsibility. He didn't preach or act like he knew everything. Instead, he shared small stories, moments that taught him about humility and control. Sometimes he mentioned the Royal Guard. He didn't tell the children it was him in the story, but he spoke about how one man's calm strength could change someone forever. One afternoon, after finishing his class, a teenage boy asked him, "Sir, do you really think staying calm makes you strong? Isn't strength about standing up for yourself?" Ethan smiled. "It's both," he said gently. "But sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't mean fighting back. It means knowing when not to. The strongest people I've ever seen didn't have to shout or prove anything. They just stood their ground quietly." The boy nodded thoughtfully. Ethan knew he'd planted a seed, just like the guard had done for him that day. Months passed and winter arrived. The cold air wrapped the city and snow dusted the palace grounds. One crisp morning, Ethan stood outside Buckingham Palace again. The air was sharp, his breath visible as white mist. The guards were still there, standing in the cold without flinching, their uniforms as perfect as ever. The sight filled him with quiet admiration. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. It was the reply letter from the royal household. He had kept it safe all this time, as a reminder of how a single moment could change a person. As he stood there, a young tourist nearby tried to make one of the guards laugh by waving his hands and making silly faces. The people around chuckled softly, but Ethan watched closely. The guard didn't react, didn't even blink. His expression stayed calm and focused, just like Corporal Avery's had been. Something inside Ethan stirred again. He took a step forward, not to interfere, but to quietly say to the young man, "Hey, don't do that. They're doing their job. Show them some respect." The young tourist blinked, surprised, and quickly nodded. "Sorry, I didn't know." Ethan smiled kindly. "No harm done. Just remember, they're real soldiers, not statues." The tourist thanked him and stepped back. Ethan turned toward the guard again. Their eyes didn't meet, but for a brief moment, Ethan felt that same silent understanding he had once felt with Corporal Avery. Respect didn't always need words. It could be shared through actions, through stillness, through simple awareness. When Ethan finally walked away that day, the sound of the guard's steady boots echoed behind him. He smiled, feeling proud, not of himself, but of what he had learned. Years later, that memory remained one of the most powerful moments of his life. Whenever people at the community center asked him about role models or real heroes, he would tell them, "Sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear red coats and stand perfectly still." He never bragged about being the man in the video, though some of his friends later figured it out. They teased him kindly, but he didn't mind. "It's fine," he'd say with a grin. "That guard helped me grow up." Over time, the online video faded away like most viral clips do, but the lesson stayed alive in Ethan's heart. It reminded him to think before acting, to stay calm in chaos, and to respect those who dedicate their lives to service. On his last visit to Buckingham Palace years later, Ethan brought his young nephew along. The boy stared wide-eyed at the guards and asked, "Uncle, why don't they move?" Ethan smiled warmly and said, "Because they're stronger than they look." Sometimes the quietest people are the strongest of all. As they walked away, Ethan took one last look at the palace. The guard still stood there, calm, proud, and unshaken by the noise of the world. And Ethan knew deep in his heart that this single moment years ago had changed his life forever. He had walked up to that palace thinking strength was about muscle and pride, but he left knowing strength was about respect, discipline, and quiet power. Real strength didn't shout. It didn't show off. It simply stood firm even when tested. And that, Ethan thought with a small smile, was a lesson worth remembering for a lifetime.